but understanding where you're at today, typically in terms of annual recurring revenue, where you want to get to in the next 1, 2, 3 years, and then reverse engineering that into an operating plan.
All right, Anthony, welcome back to the RevOps podcast. I think this might be the first time we've had a guest on for a second time. You joined the podcast with my colleague, Gideon. I think I was looking at it just now in August of 2020, which seems like several lifetimes ago. So
a lot's happened since then. So
a lot's happened, I'm sure, with you, with the world. A lot's happened. I guess we can, for the folks who watching this that or listening to this that hadn't seen that episode, maybe we can get a little bit about your background, and then we can kind of talk about where we left off last time and where things are going now.
Yeah, happy to. Well, I have a pretty eclectic background in B2B technology. Spent a lot of time in sales, marketing, customer success, and then I found my way into RevOps. RevOps is, I think, what I was doing in all the other roles. I just didn't know it. And then finally somebody put a name on it. And then I raised my hand when there was an opportunity to move into that type of role, which is also how I got connected with DealHub, managing a tech stack in a fast growing startup. So in my RevOps career, I was the head of RevOps for a really fast growing company called Emailage. And they ended up getting acquired by LexisNexis. It's a massive Fortune 1000 company. And after that, I did another startup, and it was a really fortunate situation because it was a startup that was within the portfolio of the investors that were invested in Emailage. So they were kind of looking for a similar thing. They knew what I could bring to the table. And it was nice to see, okay, I tested my stuff out at Emailage. Let's go test it out at another company. That company is called Boast AI. And at Boast, my partner and I, my business partner, founding partner of my current company, LeanScalet, we just realized that it's really hard to pull RevOps off if you don't have all the right skill sets on your team. And it's really hard to get the right team. And if you do everything in-house, it's very expensive. So we started a company called LeanScalet just 2 years ago, and we're a RevOps as a service company. So we manage the planning and execution of growth for venture-backed B2B technology companies, and we manage all the systems, do the go-to-market reporting, and bring all of the best practice processes that we've seen from the companies that we've worked with, and make sure we give people a head start on their path to growth.
I looked back at the previous interview, which I think had happened soon after the exit of your previous startup of the startup that was purchased by LexisNexis, and you had a very in-depth kind of model that you built, where you kind of were able to like plug in numbers and just know exactly down to the to the decimal point. You put X in, you get Y out. It sounds like those are some of the things that you've brought to the table in your current company, some of those best practices. Where, maybe you can, I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, if you remember that conversation at all, but if you can talk a little bit about it and maybe how you develop these kind of best practices and these processes, and how you have operationalized them.
We have a name for it now. We call it growth modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody's listening, I'll provide a link to a template that any of your listeners can download. But really the concept of growth modeling is understanding, and all these companies really have this charter, but understanding where you're at today, typically in terms of annual recurring revenue, where you want to get to in the next 1, 2, 3 years, and then reverse engineering that into an operating plan. So let's say you want to double your annual recurring revenue. Let's say you want to go from 10 million in ARR to 20 million in ARR. Well, how many new bookings are you going to need? How much pipeline are you going to have to build to feed the new bookings that you need? When does that pipeline need to be created? How many leads do you need to generate to get the pipeline? And then what does your brand awareness need to look at? And then also the customer success side. How are you going to drive your net retention up? And just every component that drives your annual recurring revenue. What does it look like to go from point A to point B? And then plug in all of the assumptions that you have and see what it takes. And usually it comes, the end output is just a budget number. It's, okay, are you willing to spend this amount of money to get to that amount of money? And does it make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, it's not every company is able to plug in numbers, right? I mean, you have to there are certain things you need to know. And I would imagine it sounds like you had a pretty good system built in order to be able to, have confidence in what you were plugging in. When you started at a newer startup, you don't have that kind of historical data to make assumptions with. Does that make it a lot more challenging?
Yeah, of course. It's a lot more challenging. And so when we started at the new startup, and what I'd say for any customer of LeanScale right now, day one, we focus on laying the infrastructure and laying the groundwork to start measuring the things that you need to measure. So some of these things just take time. Like if you want to take a look at a pipeline conversion rate to understand your bookings goals, well, you need to make sure you're time stamping the stage movement so you're actually able to measure that. Time and stage, measuring your churn reasons so you know if it's something that's market related or something more related to your product or service, and you can make some assumptions around that. So yeah, day one, lay down the foundation so you can start measuring. But you're right, you won't have a lot of that data. So the next thing you can do is just start to make some assumptions and judgments. And probably the best way, you can start with some benchmarks. So we do that with our customers. We say, okay, what's a like company in our portfolio of accounts, and how can we benchmark what their performance looks like? Or you can start to get a few leading indicators that you can try to extrapolate across other measurements as well. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're going to have to really just make sure you have the measurements in place and then see if your assumptions are holding true or not, and then make adjustments. But once you have a year of data under your belt, then you should be in a good place.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, is like, what is the sample size that's significant enough where you can have some level of faith to plug in those numbers and know that they're kind of resilient?
Sample size, well, I guess sample size and time.
Sample
size, you just use what you have. So,
right.
And that'll gauge your level of confidence in the plan. So you may need to bake in some buffers, but you're going to have to use the best that you have. And as you get more, it should refine itself. But until then, it's going to take a little bit. And timing. So how long do you need to wait? For some companies, it doesn't have to be that long. If it's a high velocity type of sales cycle, sales environment, you may be able to start getting some leading indicators in 30, 60 days.
Yeah.
And enough data to at least gut check if your plan is on track or not. For enterprise sales, it's always the toughest one because it could take 3, 6, 9 months to get something all the way to closed won. You also don't know churn as well because they're typically locked in a longer contract. So are they not churning because they're happy, or are they not churning because they're just locked into a contract? When you're in that scenario where it's more enterprise environment, usually we just look at, okay, well, what can we measure? Can we measure stage movement? Okay, how long is it taking to go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3? And can we start to make assumptions on how long the rest of the process is going to take?
I wanted to take a step back and kind of get a feel from you, like what the experience was like of being at a company that did this exit. That I think all of us that work in startups in the tech space, that's kind of the pie in the sky, the thing that we all kind of strive for in a lot of ways, whether it's exit a private company or going public through IPO. I suspect, like with many things, it's when it actually happens, it's not it's not exactly the way you imagined it. But I'd love to kind of know what that experience was like for you leading up to it. How what kind of pressures it put on you as someone in your role, and then what it was like afterwards.
It's a good question, and it is really unique. And first, I'll say it's the best thing that ever happened in my career, by far. So that experience of going through, and I'll walk you through. I entered when we were doing about $3.5 million in annual recurring revenue, and then we were doing about 50 million in annual recurring revenue, and then exited for $500 million. So I got a chance to see so much, which I could not be more grateful for. And not just the growth, but that company in particular, we were in market in a lot of different regions. So we were in market in Europe, South America, APAC. We dealt with enterprise, we had velocity, we had some self-serve, we had multiple products. So all of these different go-to-market motions, it was, I mean, I went to like the best university of learning how to scale a startup I could have ever gone to. You're always thinking about it. I think maybe at least I am. You're thinking like, okay, if we're growing, if we keep doing this, we'll get the next round of funding. If we get to this point, then maybe there's an exit. But I don't know if you ever actually believe it's going to happen. Like you're sitting, I don't know if you felt that. You're like, you have these dreams and you want them to happen, but I don't know if you're like, yes, this is going to happen for sure. So for me, the role I was in, I spent a lot of time with our exec team. I reported our CRO, and I did a lot of the board reporting. I went to most of the board meetings, and I think I started to get suspicious when there were some meetings where I had to step out of, because that never had happened before.
Right.
And I had been in fundraising, board meetings. I had been in things. And I started to get a lot of reporting requests and a lot of weird, things, a lot of urgency on reporting. So I don't know, my senses were kind of like, is something happening here? And then I remember when I found out, I was up really early because I just had how old was Stella? She was 2 months old at the time. And so I was up at like 5 a.m. feeding her. And then my CRO called me at that time, which he never does. Like he doesn't
5 a.m.
He doesn't call at 5 a.m. Yeah. He might call me at like 10 p.m., but he's not calling at 5 a.m. And he goes, "This is going to be a really interesting day in Emailage history." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It's like, today we're announcing that we're getting acquired. And I'm sitting there with like baby in my arms, like on the phone with him. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And for us, it was an exciting thing because we knew we were growing. It wasn't like, oh, we stopped growing and we're like dumping the company off. It was like, okay, if we're getting acquired, this is a good thing. And yeah, so that's how I heard the news, and that's where I was when I found out. And then the next 3 months is just weird because that seemed to always be kind of like the guiding mission, at least for somebody in RevOps, like, hey, that's what we're working towards. And now that it happened, it's like, what are we doing? Like,
right.
what?
North Star, right? Like,
yeah.
It's like, it's like if Elon Musk gets to Mars, what happens, right? Like, you don't have a mission anymore.
Like, do we start building the settlement, or
Yeah.
am I going to fly somewhere else? What do we do now?
Yeah, I totally get that. There is something about that drives you about a goal that is almost unattainable, that when you attain it, it's like the dog catching the car, whatever that metaphor is. Like, okay, what now?
That's the exact feeling. The
Yeah.
exact feeling. And it is, no, there's a waiting period. They like announce it, but the money hasn't moved yet. The transaction hasn't happened yet. So you're kind of just waiting. And Yeah, and then a lot of the team did pretty well too. So there is a day where you just like refresh your bank account and you're a little bit happier. But but those parts are kind of anticlimactic. Like you don't even know when. You just like log in one day and like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So a lot of like hurry up and wait stuff, and then it just does feel like, yeah, like when the dog catches that car, what do you do now?
And then so it sounds like you decided to go like super early stage, or you moved on to another startup. And I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, I assume that, you're stepping into a very different world, right? Coming from a company that scaled from 3.5 million ARR to 50 to 100 million ARR and exiting for 5x that. What's it like going from kind of the end of the race back all the way to the beginning?
Something I didn't have much of an appreciation for is, when it happened, it was like, okay, let's just go do it again. And you may have this just incorrect perception of what it takes to grow a company, because there's so many factors. It's your product, it's the value the product brings, it's timing and the current market conditions. There's like a million things. I know I played a part of it, but you can't RevOps your way to an exit. It'll help, but that's not the whole thing. So I think, one, it was very nice to be able to go back to the beginning and lay the foundation. So from my RevOps perspective, I just had so much more knowledge and context going back and doing it again. And I felt like I could really help and lean in with the team more. Or at the first company, I was more learning as I went and doing roles that I hadn't done before. But coming back and doing something that I have done before was just a nice experience to have. But it was just a different type of company, and they're doing really well. I think Boast is still a hyper growth company, and I didn't leave by any means because Boast wasn't doing well. I think I took that experience and that feeling of, wow, I can help. Like, this isn't just for me. I'm here helping the executive team. I'm coaching people. I'm, setting up the whole company well to be able to communicate to their investors, their board. I want to do this as much as I can. And that's when Sakai and I, my founding partner at LeanScale, are just like, wouldn't it be cool to do this for hundreds of companies? And then just get better and better and better at this art of RevOps and train people how to do it. And that just seemed like a really exciting opportunity for us. So that's why we decided to open it up.
Yeah, and so it puts you in a unique space because you've been to the promised land, so to speak. Whereas you can step into a room and say, I can help you from this very start build this thing to get to where you want to go. Because I don't know if you thought when you started at the previous company if it was going to end up where it did. I think for a lot of us, we have dreams, but being able to like walk in the door at 3.5 million and say, the things I'm going to do today are going to be the baseline for this company's ability to 10, 20x. I imagine it's really exciting. So when you today working with your customers at LeanScale, is that part of the offering? Is that, what we do today is going to be the foundation that you can build on to get to an exit? Because you mentioned there were specific kinds of reports that the board wanted and all those things. Do you have an eye to that when you're kind of starting even from scratch?
Yeah, I want everybody to have that experience. Yeah. Like that experience that I was fortunate enough to go through. I want everybody to go through it. The amount of learning, personal development, and just value that you can create for the people at the company, experience of, integrating companies, you just get to learn so much. So that's a big goal for any LeanScale customer. And that's how we frame what we do is we call it full stack RevOps, holistic RevOps, and we really always come back to that planning phase, because if you can call your shot and grow from, X to Y, then you can put yourself in a position to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Or you at least make the best bets possible that could put you in that position.
Yeah.
And so when we're doing things like, I mean, a lot of the day-to-day work might not feel like that. Like we're fixing Salesforce over here, or we're just pulling a sales report over there. But we're always building things with that in mind. Can you gather the data you need to make really good decisions? And can you build a plan that is aligned with your strategic initiatives as a company?
Yeah. You working at LeanScalet for the last 2 years, you kind of got a very unique view of a role RevOps, which I think several years ago was pretty not well defined or at all. Today is, kind of the most sought after position for hiring, and, is in all the conversations. So you've had the opportunity to watch that evolution happen. From your view, obviously we're in an economy and market that's kind of in flux. What are some of the trends, some of the tea leaves that you're seeing in terms of how the world of RevOps is evolving, and going forward, how that change is happening? What are some of the trends that you're starting to see?
I'll speak to some general trends, and then I'll tie it to RevOps. These plans that we're talking about and growing from X to Y, it used to be done very differently. You could raise capital very easily. You could burn a lot of money on bets that might not be that well thought out, and that actually was rewarded. So if you could figure out a way to burn your way into the next round, a lot of companies were rewarded for doing that. So that is pretty much not existent anymore outside of a handful of true AI companies. So that's really not how we're doing things. There's a huge focus on efficiency and being lean. And I also think there's a much bigger focus on consistency rather than looking for the hockey stick. So, there's a lot more investors in this like growth capital space rather than, hey, I'm hoping for unicorns.
Right.
They're saying, hey, I'm hoping for a couple like first base hits. And if we can get into a business that has some good fundamentals, they're consistently growing, and they can prove that they can consistently grow, those have become pretty attractive investments comparably in this environment, at least. So given that, I think one of the things people in RevOps need to really be focused on is first being part of that strategic conversation, where I think RevOps before was more, hey, take care of the systems, take care of the tools, run the reports that the VP of sales wants run, and then, just be reactive to things that are going on. Where I see RevOps more being a leader and on the same level as your head of sales, head of marketing, and needing to be strategic. So being the person who's making the recommendations of where we should invest next.
Yeah. I think over the last 3 years, I've had many conversations with RevOps leaders, and consistently that is the thing. This push for RevOps professionals and people in RevOps roles to advocate to be a strategic position rather than a CRM administrator or whatever, and it still seems like there's that tension in some places where you'll see a job title, a job listing for RevOps, and you realize it's just a glorified Salesforce admin position, and not really about the strategy behind the people, the process, the technology to support the growth of the company. So I think just wrapping things up as we kind of kind of cover what we talked about, you have a pretty unique journey starting from a relatively early stage company all the way through exit, and then eventually being able to kind of take that experience and help other companies build to scale. So for somebody in a RevOps role that's listening to this right now and is, dealing with some of the challenges that people in RevOps roles deal with, especially in this kind of climate, what do you think are some takeaways, let's say, to advocate for themselves, for, kind of quick wins that you think that they could walk away with?
A couple areas, and it depends on how ambitious the RevOps person is. I would say if you start leaning in on planning and you start leaning in on this growth model process and providing recommendations, that's probably going to get the attention of your executive team. A lot of the stuff RevOps people will have an appreciation for. There's a lot of firefighting. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. There's a lot of work that goes in to orchestrate these processes and systems. Unfortunately, a lot of that work is pretty thankless. So unless you're in a closed room of RevOps people who want to vent about how hard it is to do that, most people just won't have an appreciation for it. Mm. But where I think you bridge the execution of RevOps into the strategy is leaning in on that planning process. So I would find a way, if you can, partner with your CRO, partner with your VP of sales, start helping them put together their plans and making sure it's integrated. I think that's the best way, or the best thing to focus on that can help move you into that strategic position within the company. And also give yourself the license to do that. You may not think that you're best equipped, but I can't think of anybody better who spends all day with the go-to-market data, all day with the go-to-market teams, and sees everything that's happening to put together recommendations of what we should do next.
That's I think, a great place to put a pin in this. And hopefully, in another 3 years, we can touch base again. And after LeanScalet has, IPO'd, and
that's it.
Yeah.
We're trying to do it again. One wasn't enough. Let's go.
Putting the band back together. Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Super interesting. I think there's some really great takeaways for our audience, and looking forward to hearing more success from you in the future.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Go ahead and